It was a valiant effort. You'd expect nothing less from one of the gutsiest teams in franchise history, but it was ultimately undone by costly mistakes, terrible shooting, and poor performances from key players. And the Miami Heat season come to a disappointing end in Denver. We talk about what happened on today's edition of Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to Locked On Heat, your daily podcast on the Miami Heat. I'm Wes Goldberg here with David Ramil. However, you're tuning in on YouTube live with us after the game or later on your favorite podcast app. Thanks so much for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Well, the Miami Heat went into Denver down 3-1 and nearly did what they've done so many times in this playoff run and steal a win in the fourth quarter. But it was too little, too late, and the Miami Heat fall to the Denver Nuggets 94-89. Congrats to the Denver Nuggets for the championship, first and foremost. Well-deserved. Absolutely a deserving champion. We're going to talk about what we can learn from the Heat's playoff run and what comes next for the organization here in a minute. But let's start with Jimmy Butler, David, because that's, to me, the story for the Miami Heat. Just not a good game for him in what you would expect to be a stage that he would deliver, a classic Jimmy Butler performance. 5 of 18 overall for 21 points, 3 rebounds, 5 assists. There was a moment there in the fourth quarter where it felt like he was going to be the hero, right? He was 2 of 10 in the first 3 quarters. For 8 points. And then it looked like it was just not going to happen for him. And then all of a sudden in the fourth quarter, makes his first field goal of the second half with 5.5 minutes left on a corner 3-pointer after a Caleb Martin kick out, comes back, makes another 3-pointer against Nikola Jokic, dropping in coverage. And then he goes on to score 13 straight points for Miami. And all of a sudden you're like, wow, is this really going to happen? And then 2 bad possessions by Jimmy Butler. Kind of gets Jamal Murray on a switch with 45 seconds left, down 1, gets Jamal Murray on the switch, which is the matchup that he wants, drives the lane. Nikola Jokic enters the picture for him. He picks up his dribble, passes backwards, a bad pass right into KCP's hands, intercepted. Nuggets score on the other end. Heat end up being down 4 at one point, and then Jimmy Butler getting the ball back with seconds left, and just a bad shot. There's no other way to put it, David, against Aaron Gordon with 15 seconds left. The Heat did not need, they were down 3 at that point, not 4. Down 3, but did not need a 3-pointer there. They could have just gotten the 2-pointer and then kind of play the layup, the foul game, maybe extend the game a little bit. But it was just a bad turnaround contested shot that he really shouldn't have taken. And like I said before, too little, too late for the Miami Heat. Were you surprised by what we saw from Jimmy Butler tonight?
Absolutely. Even more so disappointed because I feel like that's going to be the lasting image of what was a fantastic playoff run for him, carrying this team through so many different parts of it, being at one point, and I think rightly so, the best player in the playoffs, and he struggled so mightily through this series and in tonight's game in particular, and I think that's what's going to be remembered. I mean, you go back to the run in the bubble, and there was that image of him doing so much in those amazing games he had, just bent over the stanchion, knowing he had given it his all. And while I don't question whether or not he gave his all in this series, the performance still came out flat. You can look at the injury, you can look at exhaustion, you can look at everything else, and yet there's no other way of looking past what happened today because it was so atypical for him. Good looks overall. There were some shots at the rim, certainly deterred by Jokic's big body there, and from fantastic, help defense from Aaron Gordon or others. And yet it just wasn't enough, and he wasn't able to capitalize on what should have been easy looks. I texted you at one point in the first quarter when Miami was up by a slim margin, and it seemed like they could have gotten a much bigger margin at that point because they had missed so many shots early in the first quarter. And both teams, suffering from some early, maybe even consistent jitters throughout the game, like just shots that had been falling throughout the series on both sides, not falling tonight for either group. and ultimately for Miami to come up short. Look, another valiant effort from Jimmy late in the game. And to your point, you thought maybe he might be able to salvage things, might be able to have just one more magical moment in him. Unfortunately, not the case for him in Miami. And so we'll have a long offseason of people dissecting Jimmy Butler, whether or not he's a 1A in today's game, whether or not he can carry a team, whether or not injury was as much a factor, seeing him downplay it so consistently. And for many reasons, our perception of him, whether or not he just is able to push through it, et cetera. And I wonder how much of that was really a factor. He probably will never admit it. He'll go to his grave without really pointing to the ankle as any kind of excuse for what happened in tonight's game or in the series. And yet it's going to be a talking point, and it's not one that can be avoided by fans and people who love this game as much as Jimmy does.
And it shouldn't be avoided. I know that Jimmy doesn't want to talk about it, and he won't talk about it, but it was a factor. It certainly was a factor. You just look at his splits ever since he missed the game because of the ankle. So you can't deny that it was ever not hurt. I know it was game 2 against the Knicks 3 rounds ago, but still, like, he injures that ankle in game 1 against the Knicks, and you just separate out his splits, and it's just so much different after that. He re-aggravates it in that Celtics series, and he's playing, 40 minutes a night minimum for the last 6 weeks. Like, this is a wear and tear. It's not just the ankle, but it's just a lot of miles for somebody his age. You look at the Nuggets, man, these guys are 28, 26, 25, 24. That's a young team that was very healthy and very big and very athletic at certain positions, especially at the positions that Jimmy Butler was going one-on-one against in the case of Aaron Gordon, right? And so it was a tough matchup for the Miami Heat, but also the Denver Nuggets were a tough matchup for everybody. The Lakers, the Phoenix Suns, the Minnesota Timberwolves, they rolled their way to a championship because they're that good. And for the Heat to have to face that boss battle in the NBA Finals, which was just a tough matchup for so many different reasons, I'm not surprised that they broke down and ran out of gas at the end. This, to me, wasn't Jimmy Butler failing, right? We have seen it too many times where Jimmy Butler does have what it takes to be that guy. We could debate whether or not he could be the top player on a finals team. I think that's a fair debate to have. I tend to think that he can be that player. But if you tell me that you don't think he's that player because he hasn't won a championship, it's also hard to argue that point, right? So that that's a fun sports bar debate that we can have. But I think certainly the ankle, the injuries, the wear and tear, what is being asked of him is a factor in this. And I do think that it's not the first time we saw this team limp its way into Game 7. The reason he took that shot against the backpedaling Al Horford in Game 7 of the conference finals last year was because he didn't want to go to overtime, because he didn't think he and his teammates had enough to beat the Celtics in overtime. You go back to the 2020 bubble finals, and that team broke down because Goran Dragic, Bam Adebayo get hurt in the NBA Finals, and Jimmy Butler doesn't have enough help anymore, and he's bent over the stanchion in Game 5, right? So this team repeatedly gets to the precipice of the finals and then doesn't have enough to win the championship. And I think that it's sort of a feature and a bug, right? This team, I think we have learned, is this good. It is good enough to compete for a championship, but it just might be a hair short of having sort of the firepower and the wherewithal and the freshness or whatever it is, just like that extra thing to kind of get them over the hump in the end after a 6 or 7 week playoff run.
Yeah, certainly if there's an injury factor to consider. Look, it was a team that has scraped by for most of the regular season, asking role players that might not be on NBA rosters outside of Miami, and they did not. They had some big moments here and there throughout the playoffs. Unfortunately, in the finals, most of those same role players came up short. Max Strus certainly did today. Caleb Martin struggled at times. Gabe Vincent certainly struggled. You could look at that and just say Miami, their roster construction has been a concern for any Heat fan. Looking at what happened in the offseason, the lack of transaction moves, the lack of transactions at the trade deadline, they were hoping that something magical would happen, and it did. And they got a lot of great performances earlier in the earlier rounds of this playoffs. And when it mattered most, when you're going up against a very good team, and when you need those performances to stay consistent, maybe they were just taxed out. Maybe they were just at a point where they couldn't summon whatever it was had helped them against the Celtics, against the Knicks, against the Bucks to get to that next level. But you know what? I also want to just add that, a lot of people are going to chime in here, and I'm sure I say this for a lot of Heat fans. It was a fantastic season. you'll hear a lot of complaints from Celtics fans or Knicks fans or Sixers fans, anybody in the Eastern Conference, that maybe they might have done a better job against the Denver Nuggets. I don't think they could have. Maybe we'll never know, and it doesn't matter. The point is Miami beat those teams, and Miami was here, regardless of whether Jimmy was 100% or 20%, or whether Gabe Vincent and Max Strus are actual NBA players. You can ask any questions you want to. It doesn't change the fact that Miami challenged Denver in a way that no other team had in this postseason run. They did a fantastic job. It was magical. It was something that any Heat fan can be proud of. For all the questions about the regular season, the lack of effort at times, the fact that they were outstandingly mediocre for most of it, if not all of it, what they did during the postseason was as good a run as any as I've ever seen. They were an 8th seed that tried at every opportunity, maximized every chance, beat opponents, killed them in many ways, both psychologically, emotionally, and physically, and did everything they possibly could to put them in this position. It just unfortunately wasn't enough.
I'm with you. I feel like actually not much disappointment in this finals loss. This was like everything. I mean, look, first of all, the Heat beat the Knicks and the Celtics in a playoff run. I mean,
sure.
That's amazing if you're a Heat fan, okay? And this team was the 8th seed. They had really no business getting this far. They're the first 8th seed ever in a full season to make it to the NBA Finals. That's an historic accomplishment, and it's one that should be commended. And Nikola Jokic, even after the game, and every time he's been asked, has nothing but respect for the Miami Heat. Nikola Jokic winning Finals MVP, and deservedly so. And the Nuggets deserve this championship. So this is everything about this run, at least from I can only talk about me personally, has been icing on the cake, right? Yeah. You and I did not expect to be covering games this long. Like, I remember before the play-in game, walking around just like starting to plan off-season content because I didn't think the Heat could beat the Bulls in the play-in because it didn't look like they could because they just lost to the Hawks. And by the way, they were a quarter from not beating the Bulls. They had a fourth quarter comeback from kind of backing into the playoffs. And then this run just happens that nobody could have expected. So it was a fantastic ride. It was great. Just a couple more points on Jimmy Butler here, though. Missed 8 shots at the basket, according to my charting. Basket restricted, like short paint area. These are shots that he makes so much. I think he was a little bit bothered by Jokic. I think he was a lot bothered by his lack of athleticism. I think because of the ankle injury. I think all of these things come into play, right? And so you're going to hear a lot of talk over the next couple of days. That's like you were alluding to earlier. Jimmy's not that guy. Can't be that guy. You need a different guy. All this stuff. Or the Nuggets are great. On all these, you're going to hear just a lot of sort of binary type of conversations.
Yeah.
The truth is it's somewhere in the middle, right? The truth is it's all of these things combined. The Nuggets deserve it. The Heat were limping. The Heat have been limping at this point every year for 3 out of the last 4 seasons. And I think that's something that they need to think about as a front office and address. We're going to talk about all this stuff as the show goes on. We're just getting started here. We're going to talk about takeaways from the season, what we learned from this playoff run, and then later on get into some stuff about what's next for the Miami Heat and the offseason that starts basically right now because the draft is in 10 days. So we're going to talk about all that stuff coming up. But first, David, tell listeners about our sponsor.
Today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. For a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay's guaranteed fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check to know the part will fit, or you get your money back, because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game. When you shop on eBay Motors, and with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. So get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay's guaranteed fit is only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only, and exclusions do apply.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Every dayers, we're going to be back every day throughout this offseason, covering all the news, rumors, whatever we think is happening, the NBA draft, free agency. We're still recording and giving you shows every day throughout the offseason, so make sure that you are subscribed and you are locked in to Locked On Heat. What can we take away from this season, this playoff run in general? Because they get this far with Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo and just a cast of undrafted role players. And there's so much talk about Heat culture. And we're not far removed, David, from Miami's run through the Eastern Conference bracket and to the NBA Finals, like kind of prompting people to ask questions in front offices to reflect on what are we doing? What are we doing wrong? Right? Not just the Celtics and the Sixers and the Milwaukee Bucks, but the entire league was looking at the Miami Heat and saying, how can we kind of do something like what they're doing? Do we need to reconsider how we're constructing our rosters, right? So I know that the Heat lost in the NBA Finals, but I think it's worth revisiting that question. Is that something? What can we learn from the Miami Heat? What can the Miami Heat learn from themselves after this run?
It's a tough question to answer, especially right on the heels of the loss in the finals. But I think it has changed the perception. I'm glad you brought it up because I was talking to some people who are not necessarily insiders, but they do have, they're privy to the idea of some front offices and how they approach the draft. And I asked, does this Heat run change the perception of how they approach the draft? And I think it does. I think it kind of puts the onus on building a team rather than through the hard to define, impossible to define really talent, and just say sometimes you get the right players at the right times who do, as Eric Spoelstra has said, live for these moments, who want these opportunities and who are willing to lay it on the line. You have to have a balance of both. You're still going to go for talented players. This is the NBA. This is the way the world works in general, especially when it comes to athletics. But you also want players that want to be there, that fit in the right way, that are willing to make personal sacrifices. And I think that's something that will be a hallmark of this team, is that every player on this roster made personal sacrifices at one point or another, whether it was minutes, money, opportunities, whatever. They've all given up something for the greater good, which is to continue to win, to find team success. And I think that does matter. So and it's not to say, look, Miami has it. I think you can make the same point about Denver. Like,
Sure.
you've got a superstar there. And with the exception of that, you've got Michael Porter Jr. He's getting paid a whole hell of a lot of money, and he struggled throughout the postseason, especially in the finals. But you got a guy like Bruce Brown, who took a one-year deal just to be there. Aaron Gordon, who's a high draft pick, who's never really panned into a star. He turned into a great role player.
Wanted to be on the ball in Orlando, and then fits perfectly next to Jokic and Murray.
Borderline all-star, really.
Yeah.
Everybody kind of making the right sacrifice at the right time, understanding that a win is more important than anything else. So I think if you're going to look at what this Heat team has accomplished, and if you're going to extrapolate it out to, maybe a team building process for other groups, I think it's that. And I think that's something that Miami can focus on too. Is like, yep, we had a very good group, and maybe that's just it. They were very good, but they tried very hard. They were sacrificing for one another. They were willing to do anything for a win. And that's important. And I think you still want to surround those great personalities with talent, with players who have been here, who can score, who can create offensive opportunities much more easily than this Miami Heat team was able to do.
The problem with that, and I don't disagree with anything that you're saying. And even Steve Kerr went on Draymond's podcast praising the Miami Heat and their players and their culture and all these things in terms of, hey, like, these guys buy in. When Kyle Lowry has to move to the bench, he doesn't sulk. When somebody else, when Kevin Love is in the rotation and out of the rotation, when Caleb Martin has to take a bench role after doing a great job as a starter all regular season long, these guys don't sulk. These guys don't complain about their jobs or not getting shots or not getting minutes or anything like that. And for Steve Kerr, he was obviously kind of talking about his own team, because that was obviously an issue with some of the young players that the Warriors had, and kind of unraveled that group. So the same thing that you're talking about, praising the Miami Heat and praising the Nuggets for doing all these things, we've seen the flip side of that with the defending champions, right? Kind of do in their season. So but that's not new stuff. Head coaches and front offices always wanted those players. Front offices weren't always going out. You know who I really want? The guy who wants to take a bunch of shots and then complains when he doesn't get those shots. That's the player I want.
Brooklyn assembled a talented group with Kyrie Irving and James Harden.
No, I mean, and that's the thing. I think the difference is when you have your star players, when do you have enough, and when do you start trying to build and surround those players with those kinds of players? I don't know. I'm also not going to blame Brooklyn for going out and getting Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, and James Harden when they had an opportunity to do that. You know what I mean? So maybe we are getting past the super team era, because between the Heat and the Nuggets, who were very patient with Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic, Michael Malone saying the other month, like they had opportunities to trade Jamal Murray for bona fide superstars that were superstars in the moment and didn't do it because they believed in their guys. So I think you can take both lessons from both of these teams and say, hey, maybe if you like your guys, it's maybe enough to, I'm not going to say it, and I hate to say that I'm going to say it, trust the process, right? And that's what both of these teams did. I think what I'm learning from the Miami Heat is that they can find these guys and they can get a lot out of these guys. But time and time again, and in the fourth quarter in Game 5 tonight, David, they were asking too much of Max Strus and Gabe Vincent, right? Asking Max Strus to create a shot at the end of the shot clock with like 50 seconds left. Like, that's just not going to cut it. So you can have those guys to fill out your roster, but I still think at the end of the day, talent, size, whatever it is, that's going to be the most important thing, right? That's going to be the Heat don't get here if it's a bunch of Max Struses and Galen Martins, right? You need a Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo to get this far. You still need that top end talent, but there's places for those role players to contribute, and there's ways to find those role players that maybe if you're developing guys through your G League program and finding specific guys who may have been undrafted or unheralded, you don't necessarily need to go out and find like that 35-year-old ring chasing veteran for every role player spot anymore, right? There's ways to be patient and find these guys and develop these guys, but you need the star power at the top. So that's the other part that I've learned from the Miami Heat, not just this year, but I think over the three of the last 4 years when they got this close, this stretch with Jimmy Butler, there's still a guy short, a star short. And that's my big takeaway from this in terms of where the Miami Heat are. Can they get that star? Maybe we should explore that after the break. David, tell listeners about our sponsor.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get a no-sweat first bet of up to $2,500. That's $2,500 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. They've got great promotions every day. The app is safe and secure, and maybe more importantly, you get paid instantly when you win. There's no better place to bet all the playoff action or whatever's next season's action than America's #1 sportsbook. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and get a no-sweat first bet of up to $2,500. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA.
Thanks again for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Everydayers, remember to subscribe because we're going to be back every single day throughout the offseason breaking down what I'm sure is going to be a drama-filled, news-filled, rumor-filled, noise-filled offseason for the Miami Heat. So make sure you're tuning in to this show.
Can I just make a quick PSA here for anybody tuning into the show? If you're jumping on and you're going to criticize this team at this point in time, or not criticizing is fine. If you're going to come in here and attack players or the Heat season because you're a fan of the Celtics, Knicks, etc., just know, I'm putting it out there. You're going to get banned. I'm sorry. I'm not tolerating that crap right today. I know I'm trying to be fair and accepting of any criticism, and that's fine. At the same time, I won't stomach it. Not right now. We don't want to hear all that crap. There's trolls from every fan base. Go spend your time doing whatever else, something else. Go find a life somewhere.
Well, I mean, what is the level of disappointment for you right now? I kind of already told you my thing.
It's huge. I think I'm genuinely disappointed. Again, I'm really encouraged by the postseason run. I think they had something fantastic, magical. What I saw, I can't help but continue to equate it to this just because my own, I think covering this team through the Orlando bubble and the struggles of the pandemic and the social injustices that were being brought to light and the constant turmoil in our lives and just being able to follow a team in this weird, strange environment was so unique. And at the same time, for me personally, really fulfilling because they exceeded incredible expectations. They came together at a time when there was so much doubt and darkness and just general adversity in our lives. And they had a fantastic showing. And I think this was an echo of that to a certain degree, because again, there was a lot of mediocrity throughout the regular season and counting this team out and not knowing what they were capable of. And then somehow they wind up finding their place at just the right time, exceeding expectations, being a fantastic team above all else, led by some incredible performances. So you want to see it culminate in something tangible. No one will remember that they made it to the Eastern Conference Finals, unfortunately. They won't be able to etch their name into the history book the same way the Denver Nuggets deservingly are able to do. And so that's a level of disappointment for me personally, is that they won't be remembered for the gutsy performances.
I
We'll
disagree.
talk about this.
I disagree. No, because
okay.
they were the 8th seed that made it to the NBA Finals, the only one in a full season to ever do it. If it happens again, that team, right? Like every TV. I mean, it's gonna happen. We heard all about the Knicks that did it in the lockout year. When the next team, because it'll happen again, when another number 8 seed gets close, not even making it, just gets to the conference finals, everybody's gonna start remembering that this Heat team, right? That was the last team to do it. I think they're like, they won't be remembered the way that these Denver Nuggets will be remembered.
I don't know.
Of course.
I'm saying
this was a run that I think will be remembered in a way that's different than the Celtics making it last year, or the Suns making it the year before that.
I have to disagree there. And it's not like, again, I think it should be remembered. And I'll make that point clearly. I think it should be remembered. But
what does it even mean to be remembered? Like, people are
that's it. It's huge. It's huge on a personal level. Like, maybe it's
I'm asking you what it not the significance of being remembered. Like, when you say they're not remembered, what do you mean by not? It's not like we're not going to talk about every day. Hey, remember when the Heat made the finals as an 8th seed?
I get it. Let's break it down simply. Like, you talk about, I've watched a lot more basketball than you, just by virtue of being older than you are, and I've seen great teams that went up against the juggernaut of Michael Jordan and those 6 championships, and without the Houston Rockets being sandwiched in there, like, people forget Patrick Ewing, those New York Knicks teams, Reggie Miller, and those Indiana Pacers teams.
But we don't. We talk about those Ewing Knicks teams and be like, wow, wasn't it crazy that they never got a championship?
Look, what's the knock on Charles Barkley that even his own friend and castmate and TNT brings up all too often?
He doesn't have a ring.
Charles Barkley, exactly.
But we remember that he got there. That's the whole point. That's why we bring it up.
I don't think anybody does. I don't think anybody I don't think anybody remembers Charles Barkley being in the 1993 NBA Finals.
He was
winning
awesome
MVP that year.
Okay. Well, it depends on who you ask, right? 1993.
Yeah, I suppose.
But what is that? 30 years ago.
30 years ago.
But
30 years ago.
Jesus. But it's people that watched it remember that Charles Barkley had a great finals. Like, I know. I think we kind of just throw that term out there, like, nobody's going to remember this. I remember that Chris Paul almost got one.
Look, let's say in the context of, let's say it's a discussion point, because I don't know why this was being brought out right before NBA Finals Game 5, but Jimmy Butler asked if he's a Hall of Fame candidate, will he? What does he think of that? And he says, and I don't agree with him 100% at all. I think he was lying, quite frankly. He says, no, it doesn't matter to me. Those individual accolades, I'm not even going to go to the induction, whatever. Like, what's going to be held against Jimmy if he continues this career trajectory is that he didn't win a ring, that he made it to the finals twice and wasn't able to seal the deal. And that's just the talking points boil down to, what did you accomplish in terms of something quantifiable? MVP trophies, accolades of All-Stars or All-NBA accolades, and of course a championship ring. And I think that's unfortunate, because it's so hard. It's so impossible to win a championship that you have to kind of look at it from like a team like the Golden State Warriors. What they were able to do is incredible, historic context, to be able to win as consistently as they did. And look, those Cleveland teams, and I know if it's a sore point for a lot of Heat fans, they were really, really good. They made it to the finals 4 times and came out with just 1 champmpionship.
We remember
what does that matter? But we remember it. Exactly. We remember that 1 championship, the city of Cleveland.
We remember that they were there 4 times.
No,
the opposite of remember.
You don't.
So no,
you
I
don't.
think so. Here's what.
I disagree there. I disagree.
What, people forgot who the Warriors were playing.
It was 7 years ago, so no, it's not. But at the same time, I
think the word you're looking for is not remembered, but appreciated.
No, I think it's remembered. I think, again, we're 7 years removed.
So I'm sorry. Do you think people are forgetting that the Warriors beat another team in the finals? That's what I don't understand when you say remembered. I don't think
anybody cares. Like,
cares appreciated, but remembered. Like, remembered is a specific word. Like, we know these things happened, and therefore
I guess you could look it up on Basketball Reference, but I mean, that's not going to can you rattle off right now what 6 teams the Chicago Bulls knocked off? No, you can't. I mean, maybe you personally can, but most people can't.
I think a lot of people can. Okay, most people don't. Right. Of course, most people don't know who won the finals.
All they say is Michael undefeated, 6 tips to the finals, 6 rings.
I think they skip over. I think I understand what you're saying, is that they sort of just skip over it and don't care enough to mention it. But Bulls fans know who they beat, and the fans of those teams know that they lost, and people that pay attention to the NBA in the 90s know exactly who those teams are. I could tell you the last 10 finals. I'm just it's probably more than that, but the last 10 finals matchups, including the losers. But in terms of these Heat, I do think that people are agreeing with you. I think it's not. I think that it's the word "remembered" that I have a problem with. Maybe the Heat won't be appreciated as much as they ought to be after this run, and that's the thing that I feel bad about Jimmy Butler, because he deserves to have a championship. He is good enough of a player, just like Charles Barkley. To your point, was good enough to win a championship.
Patrick Ewing, Karl Malone,
Patrick Ewing, all these guys. Yeah, exactly. And there is a chance that Jimmy Butler finishes his career without a ring, and he would be part of the Ewing, Chuck, Karl Malone group. That would be his new group, instead of the group that ultimately won one, such as a Kawhi, who just has one of them, but is thought about in this kind of different rarefied air than these other guys. Whatever. He has, that's right.
Toronto, San Antonio. Finals MVP. Whatever. I mean, had the Heat won the championship, would Jimmy have gotten MVP? I mean, not considering the individual greatness.
It would have been, I don't know. I don't know how voters vote anymore. I think the Iguodala thing kind of changed the way that voters vote. I think they just kind of give it to the best player now.
Yeah.
Bam, if they won this series, Bam should have won. I mean, who knows? If they win this series, I don't know what was going to happen the next 3 games.
3 more wins,
Maybe Max Strus wins it. I have no idea. But all right. So that's enough. With that, there's going to be a lot of time for reflection on this season. I want to go back to what you said before. I'm not going to try to parse whether or not who remembers what. I will say this. Is there a sting in the loss immediately after? Of course there is. Come on. Of course there is. I thought it would have been awesome for this team to even win in Denver a second time.
Yep.
Something after nobody had beat them before the one time in Denver. Get this thing back into Miami, maybe win here, maybe lose here, or get it to game 7 and lose it. Even, you know what I'm saying? I'm playing out losing scenarios. Obviously, it would have been better if they just won. But it would have been cool. But
this is a good point. Sorry to continue the whole trend here.
Go ahead.
We're the new Buffalo Bills. Like the fact that they made it to 4 Super Bowls, was it? I mean,
4.
Unbelievable. I mean, I know, again, this is context of being in the AFC East with the Miami Dolphins, so a lot of fans remember maybe a little bit more acutely. They were a very, very good team, but who cares that Thurman Thomas and Bruce Smith were and Jim Kelly, etc., were as good as they were, because they just went and they choked in moments that matter. And I don't know.
Well, it was different. The Bills choked. They were missing field goals. They were doing things like that. I don't think that the Heat choked. I don't think that anybody that can.
You don't think that's going to be the conversation about Jimmy?
I don't care what David. I don't care what the conversation is. I just know that it didn't happen. My conversation, my point of view is that they didn't choke. I think it's fair. Jimmy Butler shot 40. I think I'm trying to do math off the top, like 42% in the finals. It was not a great finals for him. If somebody wants to make the argument that Jimmy Butler choked, go ahead, have fun. You've got the stats to back up your argument, quite frankly. But I think it was pretty clear that he's older. His body breaks down. The way he plays is just so physical. I think he could be your best player to lead you this far. But I think you need somebody who just gets easier offense.
Do you need a superstar, though?
It depends. I think you need a superstar scorer. Now, is that a superstar level scorer? Is that player a superstar in totality on both ends of the court? I don't know. But I think you need a guy who can go out there and get you 28 a game and average that in the regular season and do that in the playoffs. And I think for most people, that would qualify as a superstar or something close to it. So let's talk about this, the offseason. All right. What comes next for the Miami Heat? I think that's got to be now. Pat Riley, Andy Ellsberg, Adam Simon, Eric Spoelstra have to get together and find out, how do we go get that guy? Because I think it's clear that they need to go. Jimmy Butler does not want to. He's said over and over, I am not a scorer. I don't want to be the scorer. Bam Adebayo would be so much better not being asked to have to score 25 points a game for this team to win on a big stage and go forward to the playoffs. If you can find a 1A scorer, that changes the entire dynamic of this team in a major way, and I think would put them right at the top again of the Eastern Conference next year. Obviously, the question of how to do it is a very different question, but to me, that's sort of like, okay, if we're planning like wish list stuff, that's number 1 on the list.
I agree. And I know a lot of people already, even in our comments here. Again, minutes. The corpse isn't even cold yet on this Heat season, and everybody's already a Dame season. And I think Dame Lillard is by far the best choice because he's in that right sweet spot. Still an all-star, still an incredible
Such a
scorer,
perfect fit.
fits a position of need, and he's willing to do all that. He probably. It's not to say he can't do anything else, but that's not his strength. He's not a great defender. He's not even he's a solid playmaker at the point guard position. But I mean, you're putting him out there and it's 30 points rolling out of bed. That's it. And so that makes it easier.
Steph-like range, right? He's the closest thing to Steph outside of the Bay Area. Yeah.
At the same time, I think you can consider a Bradley Beal being in that same mode too, right? He's a gifted scorer. And again, you're not asking him to do too much else because you've got such excellent supporting superstar level role players like Jimmy and Bam who do so much of the dirty work, so many of those little things. So it's worth considering Beal as maybe 1B, maybe not that far away to the first option being
I think it's fair, right? Obviously, if you could have Damian Lillard, and this depends on price and availability and all these other factors, right? But you would choose Damian Lillard. I think Beal has the no trade clause, which is worth discussing. Beal can basically direct his way if the Wizards were to make him available. And my sense is that the Wizards have they are going to be willing to make him available. It feels like they need to do something to sort of reset there. And if they make Beal available with that no trade clause, Beal has some leverage in where he wants to be directed. And he's been talking about, I want to finish my career with the Wizards. If that's not an option anymore, he's also been very complimentary of Miami and it's kind of looked at that team. So I'm with you. I think those two guys have to be on the top of the list. Maybe he could get both of them. Just going to throw that out there.
I know you mentioned that before. That's a difficult concept to wrap your mind around. I know there are some contracts that are movable and things of that sort, but maybe that's another question that kind of stems organically from this. Like having recognized the importance of role players throughout this postseason run and knowing that they had big moments and also came up short in big moments. Is it worth trading a lot of those same contracts? Kyle Lowry was fantastic in game
Great
5.
finals. Great finals in game 5.
But in game 5, like hitting threes, falling away, beating players. Hey, I don't give a damn.
At the end of the third quarter and at the beginning of the fourth quarter, kind of set the table for Miami to have a chance to steal that game. Good point.
And it's hard to strike that balance because as good as he was, and he had few moments during the regular season when it's a lot longer of a time period. And people get frustrated with why isn't Kyle out there? Why does he suck so much? Well, he was hurt, etc. He missed a lot of time. But can you justify keeping him on the roster for $28 million next season? That's a little harder to do.
That's the thing.
Knowing that Duncan Robinson has perhaps increased his trade value because he did show out in the postseason as a key role player. Is he worth keeping? Or do you think it's better value? These are the balances that Andy Ellsberg and that front office has to strike, is whether or not keeping them at X millions per dollar per year is worth it, or do you package them knowing that you're going to have to trade for a star that's going to earn as much money as a lot of these role players put together, and that you're just going to have to surround them with other role players that you're going to have to find. You're going to have to rebuild this roster if you acquire a Dame, etc. You're not going to be able to keep Max Strus, Gabe Vincent, Duncan Robinson. So somebody's going to have to go. Maybe a lot of those players.
Even Caleb Martin.
I would say almost definitely Caleb Martin. Like given his value, because again, he showed out for most of the postseason. He's young enough. He's athletic enough. He showed aggressive.
One of the best value contracts in the NBA.
I said this last year, and he's only improved his value this season, considering what he did during most of the playoffs. And I think, NBA execs around the league are saying, this is a guy making less than $10 million a year. Yeah. No, he's a great player. I'd rather have him than maybe a lot of wing players that are getting paid a whole hell of a lot more. So why not bring him in? Yeah. Have him bring some of that slice of Heat culture to whatever team. If you're trading, Dame Lillard, maybe he doesn't have a fit in Portland, but you'd want something like Caleb who can produce and is at a high value contract.
To answer your question, whether or not you were willing to part with a Lowry, Duncan Robinson, Caleb Martin, it just depends on what you're getting back. If you're getting back Damian Lillard, yeah, you do it. Sorry. But that's sort of going back to the lessons
right.
learned of like, just because you have the role players doesn't mean you have to always keep the role players and continue to pay the role players. The real lesson that the Heat and other organizations should take from this is that you can continue to develop these role players and fill in the cracks around your stars. At the end of the day, despite this great run from the Miami Heat, I still think that you're going to just want the more talented players. That's going to be every front office is still going to operate with, give me the more talented player. If it's Damian Lillard versus Duncan Robinson and Max Strus and Gabe Vincent, I'm going to take Damian Lillard every single time. Whether or not that's right or wrong is that whatever. I'm just telling you what I think front offices are going to do. They're going to take the star every single time. And I think that includes the Miami Heat front office. But the real thing is, can you backfill those role players who you build up value in and find new role players, right? And they're already sort of in the process of this with the Haywood Highsmith. They love Jamal Cain on that two-way contract, right? Like, these are the guys that need to fill in those cracks if they go away. And they do have the bird rights on Max Strus and Gabe Vincent while we're on the offseason topic. Just thought that
would Miami have had a better chance in the finals? And I know maybe it's impossible to answer this accurately. Would they have had a better chance in the finals if Tyler Hero had been healthy?
Yes, no doubt.
So do they need so when you I'm sorry, maybe this is just again it kind of stems for that. If you look at it that way, do they need to make a trade? Like, I know it's fun to talk
I don't think
about.
They would have beaten Denver with Tyler Hero. You just asked me if they had a better chance. No.
Okay.
But I think, and then here's the other thing. Like, this player got hurt. This player got hurt. One of these players gets hurt every year for the Miami Heat. This is not an exception. This is the rule. This just keeps happening. So I think they do just need a player who could stay healthy. And the other thing about star players is when you have stars, the injuries hurt a little bit less, right? And they matter a little bit less. And I think that's also part of it too. We have so much left to talk about, David, but we've basically run to the limit of the regular show length. So why don't we do this? Why don't we end sort of the quote unquote show here, right? We're going to roll our post-credit little scene here, and then we're going to come back with post-credit. We're going to answer all the questions that everybody left here in the comments. Are you ready to do that?
Yeah, why not?
All right. So we're gonna sort of fake wrap up here. Thanks again for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Everydayers, make sure that you subscribe. If you're watching live on YouTube, make sure that you are subscribed right now, because we're going to be with you the entire offseason, all offseason long, still 5 days a week, covering the Miami Heat and what is going to be a very drama-filled, news-filled, rumor-filled offseason. So hit that subscribe button on YouTube. Follow, and a short one too, unexpectedly. Follow us on your favorite podcast app as well, Apple, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcasts. Stick around, though. We're going to answer your listener questions right after this. Post credits. Let's do this. It's like a Marvel movie, David. The extra bonus content at the end of the credits. Let's go. All right.
Speaking my language here.
Let's get to some of these questions. I'm just going to start showing them, and we're going to answer them. Kevin writes in, is Jimmy injured or what? He's not even attacking. I think he was injured. I think we've covered this topic. But I think it's what happens if Jimmy Butler isn't hurt?
Oh, I don't even know where to begin with that, because I mean they put away Boston in 4 maybe or 5 instead of going 7. They have more time to recover, more time to game plan for a Nuggets team that had swept the Lakers. The finals had a set starting point, whether Miami had gone 4 games or 7. And so who knows, would that have changed the outcome of the finals? I'd like to think so. But I'm also convinced that had Bam and Goran stayed healthy in 2020, they would have won against those Los Angeles Lakers.
Thank you. I teed that up for you a couple times in the show, and you didn't give me that take. I know that's a take that you've long had since the bubble, and I'm glad you finally got to it. So congrats.
No, I don't think that's deniable. Like, again, Goran was like the best Heat player in the playoffs at that point, and Bam was the key to shutting down Anthony Davis. And without either of those players for the first few games, they absolutely would have been a difference maker. But that's
Fox a Million writes in, Locked On Heat, besides the ankle injury, what made Jimmy lose his aggressiveness and confidence in his offensive game? This is a very good question, and I think that the presence of Nikola Jokic in the middle had a lot to do But Jimmy Butler at the end, 45 seconds left, gets that switch into Jamal Murray. That's the matchup he's wanted and the one that he's probably attacked most consistently in the finals. And Jokic slides over, he's just there, and Jimmy Butler just picks up his dribble. And he kind of panic passes the ball out, and KCP intercepts it. And that was pretty much the dagger steal of the game. I know that they were technically still in it, but Jokic's presence the entire finals had a lot to do with Butler.
I have to think the injury was a big part of it too, like kind of all tying in, flowing. Because I mean, against Milwaukee, he was attacking Brook Lopez and he was victimizing Drew Holiday, who's a better defender than anybody on that Nuggets roster. So I don't know. Hard to say.
And to your point, against Boston, they didn't really have that guy. Robert Williams was not Robert Williams that he was last year. Right. And he still got to the basket and was able to put up points. No, it's all sort of related. But if the Nuggets don't have a guy like Jokic, if it's DeAndre Jordan the entire series, I don't think it's an issue.
Almost
right?
As soon as he got there, yeah. He was Denver's Cody Zeller. When he was out there, he was like, okay, this is a green light to attack the basket, and Jimmy did during the brief stint that Jordan had out there. But there was a perfect. I showed the replay at one point. I think it was one of those turnovers. It may have been the costly turnover at the end there. Like he drove, and Jokic was right there, and Jimmy stops unexpectedly. A month ago, he's rising up and taking his shot, drawing a foul, doing something to change the course of the game. He did not in game 5.
This comes from Love and Light Meditation. I think everybody can use a little meditation after this one. Why was Tyler Hero not played? So we haven't even talked about this yet, David. Tyler Hero ruled available for game 5. Eric Spoelstra did say before the game that there was no planned minutes for Tyler Hero, that he would kind of see how the game was going. My theory on why Tyler Hero wasn't played, I think that Eric Spoelstra thought, if you got him to actually tell you the truth before the game, I think he thought he was going to use Hero at some point in this game. But Miami gets a 10-point lead in the first half. Yeah. And after that, it just becomes a little bit more complicated to put Tyler Hero in the game. Denver opened up, what was it, in the second half? They went up by they never even went up by double digits. Yeah. They were up by like 7 points in the fourth quarter. Yeah. It was always a tight game, right? And like when would that opportunity be for Tyler Hero? I think a lot of people say, well, in that fourth quarter, when Denver was making that run and Miami went 5 minutes without scoring. And I guess, but also Tyler Hero hasn't played in 7 weeks, and it's the fourth quarter of an elimination game in the finals. Is this really the time that you want to put him in there? I understand why we didn't see Tyler Hero tonight. I don't blame Eric Spoelstra for not playing Tyler Hero tonight. I think if early in the game, right, Denver got out to that 8-point lead in the first quarter before Miami made that 13-2 run or whatever it was to close that first quarter. If Denver just keeps that going, right, and it ends up being sort of a double-digit lead kind of midway through the second quarter, I think we see Tyler Hero at that point. But because Miami came back and built a lead and sustained that lead through sort of the bulkiest part of this game, that's why we didn't see him.
It's funny because, I mean, I'm looking back and like you held the Nuggets to 94 points, and this was one of the best offenses during the postseason and during the regular season. And yet it felt like, especially in the second half and in that third quarter when they wound up losing that 7-point lead at halftime, like you need defensive players out there. And I don't know if Tyler's the right fit. As much as you need a boost offensively, you also don't want to sacrifice anything else defensively. And I can't help but think that if you put Tyler, again, after missing almost 2 months of action, they're going to see another green light. They're going to attack him at every opportunity. Could he have caught a switch with Nikola Jokic? Like, again, this is your first game back after almost 2 months, and all of a sudden you're caught on a switch with Nikola Jokic, like who's unstoppable by one of the best defensive players in a game in Bam Adebayo. Like he couldn't do anything to stop Jokic one-on-one. So I don't know. That's too big a risk, especially when the game was as close as it was. I don't know. I'm a little, maybe I sound like a broken record. I'm a little surprised he didn't go to Highsmith a little bit in the second half. I thought he would have played a little bit.
Please let us know why Spo only played Highsmith in game 1. He played Highsmith more than that.
He did. He played
minutes here, seconds here and there. Yeah. All right. So I'm going to clear out. This is Jimmy Butler on the wing with Jamal Murray going against him. When Jimmy Butler didn't have it hurt an ankle. This is you. That's you, David, right now. I'm clearing out. I'm Max Strus sprinting to the other side of the court. This is your possession. Give us your
But
hottest Haywood Highsmith take right now.
if I follow Jimmy's pattern over I'm going to pass it to you anyway. So I don't know. The point being, look, it doesn't matter. I'm not going to second guess Eric Spoelstra. I know a lot of people are, and maybe deservingly so. Maybe that's no. Look, why didn't he play him? I don't know. Because again, you want to be able to have the best two-way players out there. With Tyler, you get something on offense probably, but you're giving up a lot on defense. With Haywood, you're getting a lot on defense, but you're giving up something offensively. He went with Max over Duncan Robinson in the fourth quarter, which I thought was a stupid idea on his part. I thought that was a terrible decision because Max was struggling. Like he had a wide open corner three that he bricked. But he still thinks of Max as the better two-way player, and that's what this game kind of required. But at some point, you kind of have to say, you know what, maybe find the right balance. If you put Duncan and Highsmith out there, you're getting the best of both worlds. And it's not to say that Duncan was like worse defensively than Max Strus. He did pick up some early foul trouble, but I still think he was a much better offensive player than what we saw from Strus today. So why he didn't play Highsmith, I don't know. A boneheaded decision on his part, man. But more concerning to me was that he didn't play Duncan Robinson in the fourth quarter.
I have no problem with not playing Highsmith that much. He plays the same position as Jimmy Butler and Caleb Martin, and you're going to give more minutes to those guys in a closeout game. That's why.
So, yeah.
And yeah, obviously. And so the Zeller minutes, though, I do want to discuss that. 61 seconds to start the fourth quarter. The Nugget, it's tie game. Nuggets go on a 5-0 run. Spo calls a timeout 61 seconds into it. And a lot of people feel like that swung the game. I would argue it probably didn't swing the game. It wasn't good, obviously, but it was also at the very start of the fourth quarter. It was only a minute. I was surprised to see Zeller.
Yes.
I kind of was looking at the box score. Kevin Love was already a -11 at that point. It wasn't a great. Kevin Love got those backup center minutes in the first half, and I think that was probably Spo's plan, but he probably didn't like what he saw from Zeller. So he's like, all right, then I guess it's, or I'm sorry, he didn't like what he saw from Love in the first half, and probably was like, all right, let me give Zeller a minute here. And then Bam was already at the scores table by the time who was it that scored the second basket? Was it Jamal Murray on a three? Like Bam was already heading to the scorers table. So it was only meant to give Bam a brief breather. It's easy to second guess it in retrospect. But
there's no one turning point in a game that's as close as it was. You know, there were moments throughout the 48-minute stretch. Like again, if they are able to capitalize on a lot of those easy looks that they got in the first quarter, do they win game 5? Yeah, maybe. Who knows? But they didn't. And so they wind up losing that. They still had a 7-point lead at the half. They wound up sacrificing that or blowing that. They wound up cutting it close in the second half at varying points. They couldn't get it done. It was just it's over the course of 48 minutes that matter, not what happens in 1 minute at the 33-minute mark.
Real Issues says, I know Jimmy's hurt, but I didn't see any fight or drive or will. We've talked a lot about Jimmy. I would disagree. I think those 13 straight points that was the fight, the drive, and the will. I thought
what he had left.
That was exactly.
I will say, and maybe this is, the body language armchair psychiatrist or whatever. He did not look the same way that he did. You remember what a mad dog he was against the Milwaukee Bucks? He was so undefeatable, like he was unstoppable, indomitable in every way, aggressive, talking smack to Drew Holiday, letting it be known to anybody who could listen to him that he was the best player on the floor. I didn't see a lot of that in this series. There weren't a lot of losing. Yeah. And you wonder whether it's...
We made fun of Grant Williams for doing that against Jimmy Butler. And, like, you know what I mean? Like, you just can't do it when you're losing. I think that's...
You kind of... It's like a chicken and egg kind of thing. Because you wonder, like, if maybe somebody on the Nuggets side had just talked the right amount of shit to Jimmy Butler, does that fire him up so that he becomes himmy again? It's a question for the ages.
I don't think that he was... I don't think that there wasn't enough trash talk for him in this series. I don't think that's the reason why we didn't see a better version of Jimmy Butler.
We saw that. Like, I'm glad you brought up the Grant Williams because I'd almost forgotten that again. You know, he like Jimmy had struggled with that game, and then Grant Williams gets it in his face, and Jimmy's like, "Oh, okay, all right, now I've got to be better."
2 weeks ago.
Yeah,
it's fair. Yeah, I mean, but like I'm saying, it is a playoff fraternity. That's 7, 8 more, whatever it was, more games. It's a lot more wear and tear. The ankle was re-aggravated after that Grant Williams instance. I thought we saw that. I thought in the fourth quarter, from tonight. That was Jimmy Butler doing what it was that he had to do. But he was like, I know that he was hurt because he kept shorting all those shots. Like every single shot he missed was short. Like that just speaks to not having lift, right? And it's just, I'm not making excuses for Jimmy Butler. I'm really not. And maybe it sounds
Not
like
about
that,
that.
but it would be also undeniable to say that it would be ridiculous to say that the ankle wasn't a factor, right? He'll
No.
never admit it, but it was.
But I also wonder, on the same token, if does he find a little extra? Because that's all what maybe would have taken. It doesn't matter. The series is over. There's no coming back from that. The what if game doesn't really matter. He didn't play his best, and he'll be the first to admit that. And Miami falls short.
Some postseason topics. Were you more impressed with the off-season topics? Were you more impressed with this postseason with Gabe or Caleb?
I think Gabe was consistently better, but Caleb's performance in the Eastern Conference Finals was one for the ages. Like again, perhaps Eastern Conference Finals MVP worthy over Jimmy Butler. I don't know. A little different,
Pick.
right?
You got to pick. You got a point blank question here, David. Come on, bring in the heat.
Who am I more impressed by? Caleb.
I'm going to go Caleb Martin for the same. I think you outlined it. Gabe was very consistent. This is nothing to say. I'm not taking anything away from Gabe Vincent, but Caleb Martin just reached higher highs, right? And that to me, at the end of the day, is what's going to impress me the most. He won that Eastern Conference Finals for the Heat. All right. It's time to admit that Jimmy is a number 2. Bam is a number 3 offensively. We have to find a true number 1 scorer. I don't disagree, actually, with Cornelius here. I think Jimmy is a number 1 alpha on a roster, a championship roster. I think he is that alpha guy. He is the leader of a championship group, and I am not going to doubt his ability to lead a team to a championship, but he is not a number 1 scorer, and he would be the first one to tell you that.
It doesn't, the problem with these rankings, I think, is that it winds up looking too linear. What you want is a complementary scorer, and the Heat doesn't have that on this roster. Nobody on this roster to whom offense comes easily, and I think we saw that in their finals opponent. Like Jokic is a hell of a scorer, but he also dominated the game in other ways with his passing, even his presence defensively. And I think Jimmy could still be that guy, but he didn't have the Jamal Murray on the roster. He didn't have that guy. Jamal Murray's not the best player on the Nuggets, but by the same token, he's their best scorer, I would say, even though he didn't lead the team in score. You just need somebody, to echo Eric Spoelstra, with that ignitability, to be able to create their own offense, and they don't have that on the roster. So you do need
like it's almost like a
gifted scorer.
It's like a bullpen. You just need an ace, right? Like I think right now the Heat, they have like good relievers, right? They have some closers. They've got some third and fourth pitchers here and there.
That's why I suggested Beal, because for all the talk about, and maybe he might be more gettable, like Beal is that, right? Like
he's like a low end ace. Yeah. I mean, he's not 2003 Josh Beckett.
Oh wow, you're going deep into the reference bag there.
It's not.
He's no outlier.
It's not deep in my reference bag for baseball. Right. That's at the very top of my bag for references, baseball references. But he, Beal's like an AJ Burnett. It's
who's our Dontrell Willis then? Come on.
I think Dontrell Willis is a little bit like Tyler Hero. He's got that fastball. A little bit kind of a one speed pitcher, but
we're losing listeners fast here with the early 2000s. The odds Marlins.
They won the World Series that year.
And who remembers that?
In terms of, I think a number 1, and I think they need a number 1 scorer in that. I would like to see somebody that's not Jimmy Butler or Bam Adebayo literally lead the Miami Heat in scoring next year. That's what I think they need. We can label it number 1, complimentary, whatever. Somebody that's not Jimmy or Bam needs to lead the Heat in scoring next regular season. That's what I think.
Naz Reid talk on the comment section here.
What is he, restricted? Let's put a pin in the Naz Reid topic. We'll do some research on Naz Reid and his free agency. Will the Heat get Damian Lillard?
Right now? No.
I forced you to answer it. I'm not answering it. Next one, Oinkies. Can you see the Heat sliding Bam to the 4 and getting a 5 next season?
No.
No. All right. I think Kevin Love could argue, you could argue that he was the 5 at times. I think that's it's interchangeable depending on matchup. We've seen with Kelly Olynyk, Myers Leonard, Kevin Love, even last year with PJ Tucker, who guarded 5s at times, right? Like, they need that kind of player next to Bam Adebayo. Kevin Love's an unrestricted free agent. He wants to be back in Miami. I think that the Heat would be willing to bring him back to Miami. Obviously, there's a lot of variables and factors that play into that.
You say Kevin Love? Is that who we were talking about specifically?
Kevin Love wants to be back in Miami, and I
No
think
doubt.
the Heat are motivated to bring him back
I think
at
he's
the right kind of contract. Well, it depends on the rest of the variables and what else happens this offseason. But yeah, absolutely. I think there's a future maybe with those two. But I think they also need to upgrade that position possibly. I think they need to find somebody younger, more nimble, lithe to kind of do what it is that Kevin Love did at a higher level. And the Heat have been looking for that player for a very long time. And I don't know that they're going to find it in this particular group of free agents. And I don't know who's available on the trade market right now. But in terms of adding size, I think the Heat need to add size. And by the way, if the NBA is going through Denver now, and all indications are that that will be the case, even though they're in the Western Conference. But you can even look at the Eastern Conference with Joel Embiid and the Bucks. They're going to be back, and all these teams. Like, the Heat need to add size. I think that's going to be another priority. In addition to scoring as sort of the top of the list priority, they do need to add size because that was the problem in the finals.
God, I hate that we're already like deep into offseason mode. I mean, I know again it's a short offseason. We don't have much time. July 1st when NBA free agents can start negotiating with teams, or at least the opening conversations. I feel like it feels like it's too soon to just launch into this kind of conversation. But I guess that's just the nature of things nowadays.
Oh, we're just answering the questions.
Oh, no doubt. I get it. It just feels weird. Like I'm still going here in this point right now where I like the Game 5 loss does not seem real to me just yet. I thought they had a better chance of pulling off another miracle.
Well, they didn't. and that's where we're at. I hate to be I didn't mean to be so like dismissive about it, but look, done with questions. Last thoughts here to end the post-credit segment here. We've been going an hour. Thanks to everybody who tuned in live on YouTube in the morning now on a Tuesday morning after, again, a disappointing Game 5. I loved covering this Miami Heat playoff run. It is one of the highlights of my career. It is one of the highlights of my Miami Heat fandom. Yeah. I thoroughly enjoyed basically every step of these playoffs after I did not really enjoy this regular season, which kind of made the postseason a little that much sweeter, right?
Absolutely.
It was an incredible ride. That team deserved to be the NBA Finals. David, I will always remember that Miami Heat team. And I'm just glad that we got to talk basketball for this long. But now we do get to talk about off-season rumors and hypotheticals. Now it's that time of the year.
I will also say I am glad that they beat everybody that they did on their path to the NBA Finals. Like I know that they ultimately came up short, but there is just a river, a thin, maybe a creek or a stream of pettiness that drives a lot of Heat fans. I think of fans in general, right? That you were able to dispatch the Milwaukee Bucks, who's been an opponent a rival for this team over the last 4 seasons. The Knicks, a long-standing rivalry there.
Yeah,
the Boston Celtics.
There was nothing better than the Knicks media, and who we banned so many of those people. The Knicks media, Knicks fans, Madison Square Garden South, all that stuff, and the Heat just shut them up and dispatched them, I think, relatively handedly. And then beating the Celtics in a way that had them questioning their very existence, and the makeup of their roster, and whether or not this was the end of their not run. Like, it was that, to me, was just the icing on the cake. So that was my biggest win of the playoffs. It was great. The only thing that would have made it better is if Danny Ainge still worked for them.
Oh, that's true. That's true. But the glimmer of hope that they gave him. And the thinking that they were going to have Game 7 there, and all those old Red Sox players, Paul Pierce, Rajon Rondo, everybody there, just to see them get blown out in Game 7, like that stream of pettiness flooded with the tears of Celtics fans, and I have to say I was really encouraged by that. So that was great. Aside from all that, and I know that was mostly joking, it was an incredible personal experience for me. I did believe in this Heat team. I was criticized from some of our own listeners and thinking that there was something left in this team, something in the tank, despite what we saw for 83 and 75.75% games, like the fact that we saw a really bad Heat team for most of the regular season and the play-in tournament, and then yet there was still always the possibility of something magical, because you hope that Jimmy Butler can find that way, and he did, and he proved me right in a way I didn't expect, even when I did lose faith after Game 2 in the Milwaukee Bucks, and I'll cop to that. I mean, that was an epic blowout where the Bucks shot historically, and it took a similar historic performance from Jimmy Butler just to match that. But for me to be able to cover this playoff run, to be there with an NBA Finals credential, to watch the way the league works during those scenarios, to see these players just form a chemistry, a likability inside that locker room that hadn't been there earlier in the season, where people were questioning whether or not there was tension in this locker room and everything else. The fact that Kevin Love, a great veteran that he is, was able to inject some kind of much needed life and energy and just camaraderie in a locker room that desperately needed that boost after not having acquired anybody at the trade deadline, or not having acquired a free agent star, and to fall short of getting Donovan Mitchell, Kevin Durant, and everything else, and still wind up in the NBA Finals despite the injuries to Tyler Hero, Victor Oladipo, despite Jimmy Butler's ankle injury and everything else, to still be here in this position. This is a once in a lifetime memory. I don't think I'll ever see anything quite like it again. I hope that if Miami does wind up going to the NBA Finals again, that it will be a much easier process. I might take some of the joy away from it, but not much.
No,
at the same time, no, it wouldn't. I wouldn't. You know what? Well, here's the better days for a great Miami Heat season.
A couple of things that we're going to be talking about in the coming days and weeks. Bam's surging reputation. I do want to talk about that soon, maybe even tomorrow, David. Damian Lillard, and if the Heat can acquire him, and we're going to I know we talked about it a little bit here, and other superstars that they might be targeting. Top free agents, top players that they could trade for, potential draft picks. The draft is on June 22nd. We're going to be covering all these topics here on Locked On Heat, so make sure that you are subscribed. Thanks again for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Hit that subscribe button on YouTube. Follow us on your favorite podcast app. To all of those watching us live right now on YouTube, thank you so much. If you missed any of the show, we're going to be breaking this up into 2 parts on YouTube as 2 separate videos, and on your podcast app as 2 separate podcasts. So thanks so much. Great season. Congratulations to the Denver Nuggets. Congratulations to the Miami Heat for a great season. And congrats to us, David. 8,000 subscribers. Here we are. Who would have known? Good times,
up a bunch, picked up a bunch of subscribers over the playoffs, because a lot of people are interested. We proved to the nation that our fans are as great as any franchise out there. We were, for better or for ill, we're out there in force.